accident. It looks like work has stopped. I don't know exactly where. Do you know what part of the building where this happened, or? Gotcha.
And so far, there have been 18 workplace fatalities in the valley, including today's.
It is difficult to believe that America is a land only recently removed from the log cabin, from primitive shelter. In this jet age, events move fast, faster indeed than we sometimes realize. The city, therefore, clearly remains dynamic under the force of constant change, and the hammer of demolition will be sure to swing with determination. The pulse of progress is steady. In America, we should not be impatient. All problems cannot be tackled at once. Let us remember that in many ways the continent is still before us. From now on, we shall be seeing much demolition. The first step in making our cities better places to work, better places to live. It will take great effort and real leadership, but as a people, we can do the jobs. What amazing achievement there has been in America.
This is a story about a nation, pushed forward by entrepreneurs and visionaries, and the workers who help lift those visions out of the ground. It's here, at the intersection of this complex relationship between business, labor, and the government, that both the best and the worst of our nation begins to reveal itself.
"24 hours a day, 7 days a week. News Talk 720 KDWN, Las Vegas.
We got to get through the dog days of summer, and it's going to be another hot one today, Ted.
And still working to clear a wreck 15 northbound at Charleston. 15 south going to be slow from Cheyenne.
2006 is a good time for America.
The United States economy has never been better shape.
Fact is, the stock market is up, employment is up.
The free and efficient movement of capital is helping to create the greatest prosperity in human history.
And Las Vegas
Thank you all.
is reaping the benefits.
With 7,000 new residents a month and 300,000 visitors every weekend, it seems there's no end in sight to the people dying to come here.
2006, money was flowing. It was easy to get. Entrepreneurs, companies, builders could get it very, very cheap. That led naturally to a huge boom.
The Stardust shutting down to be replaced by a $4 billion resort.
Hotels have taken on cartoon-sized proportions. The Venetian, the largest hotel in the world, is adding a huge new tower.
With more access to money, corporations up and down the Las Vegas Strip are thinking big and building even bigger. The Fontainebleau, a $3 billion 25-acre resort. The Cosmopolitan, a $4 billion 3,000-room hotel and casino. The Echelon, a $5 billion project spanning 90 acres.
Boyd Gaming's plans for the Echelon development include 5 hotels.
No place else in the world outside of Las Vegas other than in China where you have that kind of construction going on.
Each project more impressive than the next, but nothing is more highly anticipated than MGM's latest endeavor. This is the Boardwalk Casino. It sits between the Bellagio and the Monte Carlo Hotel in the center of the Las Vegas Strip. In its place, MGM plans on revolutionizing this city like never before.
It's called
CityCenter, the most expensive privately funded construction project in North American
that
history.
Will cover an area bigger than New York's Rockefeller Center and Times Square and Soho combined.
Hotels, residences, luxury shopping, and one huge casino.
Biggest thing to hit Las Vegas since the slot machine.
67 acres. 6-tower Colossus.
A city within a city.
Vegas companies take bigger chances, and that's exactly what MGM Mirage is doing.
This 18 million square foot growth spurt is unprecedented.
If we don't do this, who can? If we don't do this, who will?
In a city that thrives on keeping hope alive.
Holy cow. It's a phenomenal piece of work.
MGM and co-financier Dubai World each contribute $2.5 billion to jumpstart CityCenter, with an estimated final price tag of $9 billion.
Was a concrete pour like no other. Construction workers set the foundation for the transformation of the Las Vegas Strip.
I've never seen anything on the size and scale of a construction project before.
The understanding that it was coming was great. That is the largest scale privately funded project in the United States.
These gigantic buildings, you literally feel like an ant when you're on the ground floor looking up at these buildings.
Because of the size and scale of the project, people were watching it in the construction community all over the world.
To build this big, MGM needs one of the largest and most experienced contractors on the planet.
True to its tradition, Perrini continued to pursue projects that others considered too difficult, projects of historic proportions.
They're perhaps the only contractor that could take on a $9.2 billion project.
Stadiums, civil projects, casinos. Perrini has been landing massive construction contracts for the last 30 years.
Nobody had ever tried that large a project in such a narrow area before in the history of mankind, probably.
This is 18 million square feet. 18 million. The Empire State Building is 2 million square feet. So think about 9 Empire State Buildings going up simultaneously on the same site, same time. That's pretty daunting by anyone's standard.
Perrini needs an array of subcontractors and skilled construction workers to accomplish a project of this magnitude, a project designed to push the limits of what was thought possible, something Americans have been doing for a long time.
We are about to officially open the Empire State Building.
A building designed, fashioned, built by the brains, the brawn, the ingenuity, and the muscle of mankind.
In the years that followed the completion of the Empire State Building, it seemed that there were always new and daring entrepreneurs looking to push the limits of man's potential, and fearless workers up for the task of bringing those ideas to fruition. In each decade, in cities across the country, people were raising the bar and putting their mark on history.
Some of the great engineering feats in American history are not only centers of public pride, but they are also occasions for great personal pride on the part of people who made them, who built them, who saw them through to completion.
Now, MGM Mirage Corporation, facilitated by Perrini Building Company, are well on their way of putting their own mark on history.
It's a great feeling. You're up there in the air and your iron's swinging into you and you're getting it and you're putting bolts in it. Things is free, and, it's open and free. I got in a program in 1966 as an apprentice. I welded, I burned, I learned everything, and I wanted to be a connector. The guys actually putting the pieces of iron together. We got to where when the iron came to town and the crane got up, we got hired on, and we'd connect that whole job.
George Cole is a longtime Las Vegas ironworker and contractor. He's married to Monique Billingsley, whose brother Rusty is also an ironworker, with over 20 years of experience building casinos on the Strip.
There's a group of ironworkers that wanted the big jobs. They like to brag. I worked on the big job. I worked on CityCenter. And Rusty was one of them. He was working on a Cosmopolitan. That was a pretty job, too. And he told me that he's going to quit working over there, and he told me he was going to go work at CityCenter. Rusty came over, and we were sitting outside, and I was asking him, I said, so how are things going over there? He said, this job ain't any better than the other one. He says, there's shit everywhere. He says, they're not doing anything right. I said, well, you need to say something. He said, no, he said, I need the money. I'm just going to stay here and keep to myself and do my job.
We have sons in the business, and then my brother and grandsons and nephews, and we just, are, everybody we know is an ironworker, and you always know there's a danger.
Some people have said that with projects this big, there's some pressure.
There's never been anything done like it on the planet. It's like wild, it's just, you have to be on your toes constantly, 24 hours a day, you know what I mean?
It's going up too fast, basically. It's too much going on at one time. I know a lot of the superintendents and foremen are under pressure also, because they're pushed by the contractor. Because I know he wants his bonus.
Every commissioner up here was hearing from constituents, but people just saying, why are we doing 24/7? What's the push that's going on there?
Time is money on a construction project because those construction loans come at a very high price, very high interest rates. And until you finish the project, you can't get out from under those loans.
The question is something like that just inherently unsafe? You can't make it safe enough.
The owners are setting unrealistic timeframes. They put in these bonuses. If you get there, the contractors have a choice. Either do that or don't make any money.
And they want to see if it could get finished and open up on time. And there is a lot riding on it. And Perrini knows it. MGM knows it. I think everyone working on it knows it.
And it's happened again. A deadly accident kills a construction worker at a development on the Las Vegas Strip.
The position that he was in and where he was working, he probably didn't even see it coming.
For the third time in 2 weeks, another deadly construction accident. Now, 2 men working on MGM's Project CityCenter are dead.
Workers are sent home as investigators look into the 4th death this year. And wicked winds cause damage here in the valley and neighboring Pahrump. Will they wreck your weekend?
It looks like work has stopped.
On October 5th, after 3 deaths on the project in 6 months, George receives a phone call from a friend working at CityCenter that Rusty's just been involved in an accident.
And I pulled up and I told him I want to go in and that my brother-in-law fell. And they said nobody can get in except the paramedics.
Once I got there, I did see his body lying there on a floor below where we were standing. Due to the distance that he fell, the obvious fractures, did not have a pulse. We just knew that there was nothing that, that we could do that would have changed the outcome.
That particular morning, I guess I was in the shower and George had called, and our other daughter was here, and she said, Mom, Dad called. So I called him, and he said, Monique, and I said, yeah. He said Rusty fell. No, he said Rusty went in the hole. And I said, he did. I said, is he okay? He said, no, he's dead.
Because of the nature of the accident and the fact that it was a fatality, the body is usually left right there until all investigations are completed.
The exact details surrounding Rusty's death are contested, but one thing is certain. Rusty went through an opening between two pieces of metal flooring, fell 30 feet, hit a steel beam, and continued to fall almost another 30 feet to the ground level below.
Investigators say 46-year-old iron worker Harold Rusty Billingsley was working high above the casino floor when he fell about 50 to 60 feet, the equivalent of a 5-story drop.
There are specific safety laws in place to prevent worker falls, the #1 cause of construction deaths. So the question is, were the rules being followed? And who is responsible?
I really can't understand why the safety floor wasn't deck solid, because it normally is on most jobs.
Perrini and Perrini subcontractor SME Steel, Rusty's direct employer, declined all interview requests. But in their official accident report, they placed the blame on Rusty, and others agree.
I've been on that site. These are grown men. I mean, you would think that you'd make sure you were tied off. The foreman can't be up there in the rigging with them constantly, making sure that they're tied off.
We're told Billingsley had completed a safety training program just yesterday that focused on fall prevention. Paula?
Now the gaming company and Perrini Construction will face a new round of questions about the safety of their work site.
Even at the interview, they were mentioning to me, like, there's this thing we want you to look at about construction. People are dying on the Strip, and we want to know why and what's going on there.
Alexandra Berzon, a newly hired reporter at the Las Vegas Sun newspaper, starts investigating the fatalities at CityCenter, as well as the alarming rise in deaths at other projects on the Strip.
Even just the basics of, like, what had happened to cause these deaths had not been reported. At that time, the media wasn't really paying a lot of attention to those sites.
You know, these projects down there were such a scale, we really didn't have a sense whether or not this was unusual. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of workers down there. Allie joined the paper and immediately picked this up and quickly established that the numbers were way out of line for projects of this size.
So far, within its first year, CityCenter's death toll stands at 4, with 5 more workers killed at other hotel and casino projects. But not all the deaths are limited to construction or the Las Vegas Strip alone.
Hi, I'm Bill Boyd. When my father Sam and I founded our company over 30 years ago, we decided that our first priority would be always to treat the customers right.
The iconic Las Vegas casino giant, Boyd Gaming, is well into the construction of their $5 billion Echelon Resort, the second biggest project behind CityCenter. They also recently acquired a lesser-known hotel, just 2 miles west of the Strip, and increased its size to 1,800 rooms. They need an array of good workers to maintain their latest property.
The Orleans Hotel and Casino will put you in the mood for some real New Orleans French Quarter-style partying. The Orleans has everything your heart desires.
In search of a good job and a new life with his fiancée, Travis Kohler comes to Las Vegas. Boyd Gaming hires him as a maintenance engineer at the Orleans. He moves just a few miles away from his mother.
Travis was over here just about every weekend, him and his fiancée, Crystal Johnson, and we were extremely close. We hung out together, we did things together. They had no issue inviting Mom to go somewhere together. He was just a great kid. He was a lot of fun.
Well, Travis was already working for the Orleans when I went to work for him.
David Snow is 28 and married with 2 little girls.
We were starting to become friendlier on just a in-work, friendship. We were becoming friends outside of work, too.
Have a great day. Drive carefully and always keep on thinking free.
Friday morning around noon, near the end of their morning shift, Travis and Dave are alerted by Boyd management about a clogged pipe coming from the kitchen's waste system. It's located behind the building, underneath the loading dock.
Isn't that just a lovely smell in the air?
The only way to access the pipe is through 5 manholes. But entering into a confined space like this is something you must be trained for by law.
Normal protocol for the company was for them to call an outside pump company to come in and do the work. For whatever reason, they chose not to do it.
I'd say that the conversations were being held about here. You know, management was talking, and me and Travis were on the other side of the manhole. And this is where everything occurred.
Boyd's supervising engineers observe from above as Rick Luzier, an experienced Orleans plumber, enters the manhole to try and clear the clog manually.
And as soon as he cut into that pipe, he was down.
The cut pipe quickly releases a flow of hydrogen sulfide, a gas byproduct of decaying food waste. A toxic mix that, when inhaled, prevents the lungs from absorbing oxygen.
As soon as he collapses, we yell over at the chiefs, he's down, he's down, he's down, he's collapsed. Get in there and get him, get in there and get him, is the response. There's no other, conversation to it.
Then the supervisors started hollering and yelling for Travis to go down and help Rick. He got Rick's head up and he said, "I've got him up, he's okay, get me a rope." That was the last Travis said.
I'm right on his heels. I'm able to get him and Travis in one arm. And as I'm kind of pulling on the ladder, and my shoulder explodes, and then the gases get me. And that's the last thing that I remember.
It took about 5 hours for the heavy rescue of the fire department to get them out because they had to make the space healthy enough for them before they could even go down to rescue them.
By the time the 3 men are pulled out, David Snow is unconscious and the only one alive. He's in a coma for the next 23 days. According to the Clark County Coroner's Office, the other 2 don't die as a direct result of the toxic fumes. Rick Luzier drowns in the wastewater at the bottom of the hole. Travis suffocates on his own vomit.
He trusted them, and that's what he got for it. He trusted his supervisors enough to think, okay, I'm going down to help this guy. They're not going to send me in a place I shouldn't be.
That sign wasn't there beforehand, and so they ordered these signs after the fact.
Boyd Gaming, just as Perrini's subcontractor SME had done after the death of Rusty Billingsley, point to worker error.
And that's the problem, is that they're trying to do that very, very hard. They were trying to put the blame back on us, on me and Travis. I can't do it.
In 1968, as the Vietnam War raged on, American casualties overseas hit the 16,000 mark that year alone. However, another 16,000 Americans were killed here at home in workplace accidents across the country, an average of 43 workers every day. Strikes and protests from truckers, postal workers, and other industries were on the rise. After the death of 2 sanitation workers in Memphis, another advocate joins the cause.
You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor.
We saw some unparalleled labor unrest in this country. Young workers were very angry at the kinds of abusive conditions they were putting up with. There was a lot of ferment.
Then, one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history kills 78 miners and leads to the creation of the Federal Mining Safety Agency And finally, in 1970, with the country sharply divided on various political issues, neither conservative nor liberal leaders could ignore the rest of the nation's workforce any longer. And President Nixon signs the Occupational Safety and Health Act into law.
We have perhaps one of the most important pieces of legislation ever passed by the Congress of the United States. The House, the Senate, the White House, business, labor, all cooperating in a common goal, the saving of lives. And so we see a bill that represents the American system at its best. And so it is a landmark piece of legislation.
For the first time in the nation's history, there was a specific set of legal standards that employers had to comply with to ensure worker safety.
So this was a radical shift in change in employer responsibility, but also it's one of the most significant worker rights statutes that's ever been enacted in this country.
If these companies didn't have someone to set standards they have to go by, they would just do what they want to. That's the best thing ever happened to the working people when OSHA came involved.
At its inception, OSHA was responsible for creating and enforcing over 20,000 new workplace safety standards in over 100 industries.
Not guidelines, not recommendations, but this is the law.
If you're in violation, you're going to get a citation containing violations.
In OSHA's first 20 years of operation, the fatality rate was cut in half.
They used to call this the butcher shop. People used to lose fingers, hands.
But by the late 1980s, steady decreasing death and injury rates start to plateau.
A Phillips Petroleum plastics plant blew up, injuring more than 80 people.
No industry or state is immune.
And I could see the concrete as it was coming down, and I could hear the bang, bang, bang.
Disaster after disaster.
Tragic fire which left 25 dead and left footprints of the victims, which they tried in vain to kick open that day.
Each time, OSHA's called in to investigate.
Safety investigators continue their search for answers. Why did so many men die?
The blast at the BP refinery in Texas City was the worst in this country in 15 years.
To help federal OSHA limit workplace accidents, the Department of Labor gives states the option to run their own OSHA programs, with the rationale that they can better regulate, investigate, and enforce safety standards specific to their own workforce. "27 states take on this responsibility. Nevada is one of those states. After a 1-month investigation into the death of Rusty Billingsley by Nevada OSHA, the verdict's in. Perrini subcontractor SME Steel is charged with 3 separate violations. Each one is classified as serious, including the failure to properly cover the hole in the floor that Rusty fell through. The report also states that the foreman knew where Rusty was working, and with reasonable diligence, the hazard could have been detected and prevented. The company would be held accountable for Rusty's death.
In loving memory, Local 525. Plumbers and pipe fitters. Yeah, that was really nice.
Yeah.
But when George reads the full OSHA report, he claims there is a vital OSHA rule that wasn't cited, one that could have saved Rusty's life.
So the thing that concerned me in the OSHA report is Rusty laying on the deck 60 or 59 feet from where he fell. Between this floor and the floor he fell through was a floor that was not decked and subsequently made the fall the 60 feet.
George is referring to a long-standing OSHA rule that would have stopped Rusty's fall halfway down. OSHA Regulation 1926-754 mandates the need for decking or netting 20 to 30 feet below any working area, a last chance to break a worker's fall. But OSHA standards are created and altered in a constant balancing act between the competing interests of business and labor. And in 2002, federal OSHA issues an official interpretation of the rule known as a directive that, when cross-referenced with the original rule, effectively cancels out this fail-safe measure.
Federal OSHA has said that if you have a law that requires that these workers tie themselves off, that you don't have to have the decking. Years ago, we used to do both.
The House committee that oversees OSHA is chaired by California Congressman George Miller.
The current evidence would suggest this was done as a favor to the industry, to build the fall platform within 30 feet of the workspace. It takes time and money and effort to do that. If there isn't a platform within 30 feet, that fall, just by distance, can automatically be fatal.
Because of that 2002 directive, fall protection wasn't in place, should have been in place. Cutting corners didn't save lives. Cutting corners didn't make that project go quicker. But I do know that if you're not required to do something and the law says you don't have to, why would you do it?
Well into George W. Bush's second term, Edwin Folk Jr. sits before a congressional committee keen on taking over the top position at OSHA.
Mr. Chairman, I'm deeply honored to appear before you today. I am also deeply honored to have been nominated to be Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health by President George Bush.
Edwin Folk's resume is impressive. Law degrees from Loyola and Georgetown, and 20 years working in safety and health.
Mr. Folk had been on the outside previously. He had actually worked at a law firm, being hired by companies who would be challenging OSHA citations. So he knew that side of it.
Ed is a decent human being, a decent person who cares about safety and health. He didn't have a really strong regulatory background here.
If confirmed, I will work to provide more tools and assistance to all employers.
Sworn in on April 3rd, 2006, just as CityCenter's ramping up construction, Folk's objective is to keep the nation's workforce safe while limiting unnecessary regulations and allowing business and industry to flourish.
The things that OSHA was most well known for during that period of time was this whole idea of compliance assistance. Rather than hitting employers with citations, they would be more in partnership with employers.
And it really came from the top of the administration down, and I think that's really important to understand.
The issue comes down to a core American clash of ideals, of where the line should be drawn between government control and free enterprise.
Some of the sharpest ideological disputes on regulation in our history emerge as a result of fights about OSHA laws.
Increasingly, OSHA has become a lightning rod for those who think that government bureaucracy makes their lives too difficult.
Claiming it is a bullying bureaucracy that harasses employers with petty rules.
And one of the major planks of Reagan's platform was to reduce the regulatory burden, so to make regulations cost-effective. So the question is, how can we promote a greater decline in accident rates without government intervention?
And we're not just creating more jobs, we're creating better jobs. Jobs that are better paying, more challenging, safer, and more rewarding.
Different administrations with different ideological preferences, different beliefs in the free market, so-called, different degrees of skepticism about regulation are going to naturally do it differently.
One of the most notable differences during the Bush administration is their record of issuing 86% fewer safety standards than the previous administration, less than any other president since the agency was created.
I think they truly believe, or many of them truly believe, that businesses left, on their own will voluntarily comply and protect workers, that no employer wants to see workers hurt or injured on the job. That's their belief. We don't share that, quite frankly, because all the evidence and the experience, doesn't support that.
An explosion and fire at a sugar refinery. Tonight, 4 workers are known to have died while the search continues.
It has sparked fires in food plants before, and the number of dead is expected to go higher.
Dozens of factories have had explosions that killed and injured dozens of workers, in part because Folk and the Bush administration refused to move forward on a standard, a well-known standard. Industry understands how to stop these explosions, and they wouldn't do it.
Folk blames employers for the dust explosions.
It comes down to it's the employers that are responsible for complying with the standards.
The accusation is made that this administration is against rulemaking. They don't want any more standards.
And it's totally false.
Back in Las Vegas, Ali Berzon and the Sun shift the focus of their investigation to Nevada OSHA.
So I'm looking at the documents, and there's this list of citations, and then it has this huge investigation report, and I'm looking at the investigation report, and it has all these things the contractor did wrong. And then I go down, and there's this thing that says amended citations, and it says withdrawn, 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 and then there's no explanation.
These were deaths, pretty heinous deaths, some cases that it seemed incontrovertible that the employer had some responsibility.
Perrini and Perrini subcontractors pile up more than a dozen violations for the fatalities at CityCenter and the Cosmopolitan. But more than half were either reduced or withdrawn after the companies met with Nevada OSHA for what's called an informal conference, where the employers are allowed to state their side.
If the company convinces the government that they were wrong, the government has to withdraw the violations.
They were going into private meetings with OSHA and the contractor and withdrawing the citations. And that, to me, took this in a different direction. It really started to point a finger at the regulators.
52 days after the death of Rusty Billingsley, Perrini subcontractor SME Steel meets with Nevada OSHA for an informal conference to discuss the case. No family members are notified. No union officials are present. By the end of the meeting, the initial ruling is changed.
There was no contest. It was like a little league baseball team trying to play the New York Yankees.
All three of the earlier violations are withdrawn. Rusty is now solely to blame for his death.
I mean, it left me inconsolable because, in my view, they totally disregarded the events that had to have taken place and did take place for him to fall. I felt that probably their lawyers and their representatives had influenced OSHA and it influenced the report, and that the truth would never come out.
Sometimes OSHA inspectors are wrong. Sometimes OSHA backs down to avoid costly court battles. Employers have a 1 in 5 chance of getting OSHA fines reduced or withdrawn, a fact George Cole knows firsthand.
George had been a contractor. You know, he had deaths on his job sites, and knew that you could go to OSHA and could kind of whittle away these citations.
Because I'm guilty with this. I did like everybody else. I went to OSHA, I fought it, showed I had all my safety stuff in place, papers that they signed that they had training. I had everything there. So again, it went back to employee error. And I got out of it. That's the way it was. That's the way it is. And that's what happened.
At the Orleans, Nevada OSHA's initial findings of safety violations committed by Boyd Gaming are more blatant than anything associated with the deaths at CityCenter.
The OSHA investigator that did my son's case said that it was so egregious that it should be criminally prosecuted.
The Nevada OSHA inspector who conducted the Orleans investigation concludes that Boyd Corporate had prior knowledge of the danger to worker safety, but failed to act. The very definition of a willful, the highest category of OSHA violation.
They had already been told to make sure that their engineering staff people were trained and to keep them away from the confined spaces just days before.
There's memos that show it, that they had received it, that we are not to be doing this type of work, period. No questions about it. Nonetheless, they'd make this decision for us to do this type of work.
Like Rusty's case, the company contests the violations successfully.
They downgraded everything to 7 serious and $185,000 fine. As far as they're concerned, they didn't do anything wrong. That's right. That's Daddy's brother.
Yeah.
I've only talked with Debbie to a certain extent. I'm sure that it's hard for her to talk with me. After I got out of my coma and got home, I was hiding the post-traumatic stress. I was hiding the survivor's guilt. I was hiding the fact that I was just emotionally broken underneath and still physically broken by my own pride. And I threw up this huge front of, I'm okay, I'm tough, you can't kill me, fuck you. Unfortunately, it caused a lot of damage. I mean, it caused so much damage. You gotta look at the situation that I'm in now. Here it is. I've got a divorce that's on the very near horizon. I'm having to sack out in my house that's being foreclosed on. And here it was, I was hit and run on my Harley. The only thing that I can say that I've got left are my 2 little girls.
Are recession clouds looming?
The U.S. economy grew nicely, at least until this very last quarter.
There's a pretty widespread consensus that a sharp slowdown has begun.
The influx of money used to spark business opportunities from Vegas to New York during the economic boom just 2 years earlier is drying up.
When money is that cheap, well, you can invest almost anywhere and do well. And eventually, like all great booms, go bust.
Something of a financial hurricane.
A financial tsunami.
One of the ugliest days I have ever seen.
In the months leading to the economic meltdown, companies across the country were already tightening their proverbial belts.
In that environment, if there are no demands on the employer in the form of regulations, enforcement, pushing them forward, what goes are those things that, aren't viewed as high a priority, and safety and health suffered.
Although the market works in a lot of cases, there are situations where things fall through the cracks.
It's one of those cranes that's on a skyscraper.
A crane being used in the construction of an apartment building suddenly collapsed.
It is the second fatal crane collapse in New York City in less than 3 months.
If it would have fell into the building, it probably would have had 20 to 30 deaths.
We do not at the moment know exactly what happened or why.
James Loma, owner of New York Crane and Equipment Corp., had replaced a deficient part of the crane's turntable. But according to initial investigations, Loma passed up 2 reputable U.S. companies for a Chinese firm they found on the internet, who proposed to get the job done for $100,000 less in half the time.
Two construction workers were killed, including crane operator Donald Leo, who was about to get married.
There isn't a day that goes by that we don't think of my son, Donald.
As Labor Secretary, I was reminded again and again, usually the employers really did not want to hurt anybody. Usually they did want to obey the law, but occasionally I came across an employer who was just making a calculation, a simple calculation. Here's how much money we will make by subjecting our workers to an unsafe, risky environment. Here's how much money we may have to pay if somebody is injured or dies. And if the first amount of money is larger than the second, they go with the first.
The housing boom and the easy money of a couple of years ago have vanished.
In Las Vegas, the cash is still flying, but the economic downturn is taking a toll. Gambling revenues are down, something that rarely happens in Vegas.
Just one day after a deadly crane accident in New York City comes word of 2 other crane accidents across the country. In Las Vegas, a worker was killed on a crane at a casino construction site.
Everybody was overwhelmed. And not just at CityCenter, Fontainebleau, Echelon, Trump, there were all these other projects going on, and many of them suffered at least one death of a worker.
Perrini's own safety inspector, Michael Taylor, was killed at the Cosmopolitan construction site when a guardrail broke and he fell 55 feet.
When you had billions and billions of dollars of construction going on the Las Vegas Strip, and there was nobody that wanted to slow that down. Not the unions, not the contractors, not the casino companies, and not the governments. Everyone is working towards the same goal, and that's to not stop these projects.
I can go on and on, one project after another, following the Las Vegas Strip. $32 billion. The CityCenter is only a small part of that. Should we not do those projects because there may be a couple of accidents? Should we slow it down and only do $1 billion in construction a year on the Strip? Is that what, I mean, if you take it out to your logical conclusion, that's what you're talking about, right?
Some see economic recovery in the continued building of gargantuan casino complexes like MGM Grand's CityCenter. When gamblers return, so will jobs, and with it, the housing sector.
Everybody that's involved here has placed a huge bet on the completion and the success of CityCenter. The city, the state, the gaming industry, the construction trades, everybody wants this to succeed, wants the jobs, wants the revenues, wants the future of Las Vegas.
It seems to have been, just don't say anything, both from labor side as well as from management side.
Everybody put their bet here on the same number, the same color, and they're playing, if you will, roulette with workers' lives.
For the 6th time, a worker has died while working on this massive site.
39-year-old Dustin Tarter of Henderson was crushed by the counterweight of a crane.
After the 6th death at CityCenter, the local unions stage a walkout.
The council unanimously voted to take action against Perrini MGM Mirage at the CityCenter project until some of our job sites' safety concerns are addressed.
City Cemetery! They're calling it a cemetery because 6 workers have died here over the past year and a half.
We don't want any more people get killed. We want to go home to our families.
So this really was just a publicity stunt for the union to say, look, we're standing up for you workers, because you were getting pressure from inside and outside. Hey, it's not easy being a union boss, is it?
Absolutely not. This was not a publicity stunt whatsoever. Perrini has never given us any pushback on any of our concerns or recommendations. It was just getting them to move on them what it was the important thing.
Do you think you should have done something earlier?
I don't want to see another death, not by an accident that can be prevented. I decided that I had to do something. I'm retired. It's not going to hurt me. But I have a grandson. I have 3 boys. It's all Ironworkers. I decided I had to do it for them. And not just for them, but for all the other ones. So I may have done what I did, but I've changed, and I'm going to do what's right.
Construction is Las Vegas's #2 industry, but it has become the most dangerous one. And in a few hours, a congressional committee will hear from a man whose brother-in-law died at Project CityCenter.
It was intimidating, very intimidating. All I could think about, what kind of question they're going to ask me, what they're going to do. I mean, just your mind goes 90 miles an hour, just racing around, trying to figure out what are they going to say.
It's quite an experience to come before a congressional committee. We've seen the rich and powerful get very nervous, and for the ordinary working person, this is a very different experience. It brought it right down to what's at stake here, and Cole was willing to lay it out.
I'm here today on behalf of my family and our workers throughout the country. Rusty's death was not his fault. There are two problems here: the unsafe conditions at the workplace and OSHA's failure to enforce its own standards as they were written.
Mr. Cole, who's sitting next to you, his brother-in-law was killed and there was no fine. There was a preliminary fine, as I understand it, and then there was a decision to remove that fine later on.
That's my understanding based on his testimony.
So you went from a preliminary fine, and then later it was determined that it was entirely the fault of the worker and no fine was issued.
Well, that obviously, Mr. Chairman, came under Nevada OSHA, and the question then becomes, I don't know exactly what was all in part of that.
As the hearing went on, you had this sort of growing anger by members of Congress because it was very clear that OSHA was not prepared for the hearings. They couldn't explain what had taken place. They couldn't come up with the rationale for changing the false safety standard that led to the deaths.
In the case that we're talking about of Rusty, they didn't have the 30-foot or 2-story protection because he was supposed to be tied off then? Was he supposed to be doing one or the other on this job?
Which one?
On the job that we're talking about. Was the
fall protection up? I'm not sure if, whereas I'm assuming that he was above, was at between 30 and 15 and 30 feet. Because
I think it's pretty clear that federal OSHA either was asked to or decided to take a walk on the enforcement of this site and the oversight of Nevada OSHA, whether it was living up to the standards that allowed it to run an independent agency.
I hope my testimony before you today will prevent future fatalities and help bring closure to our family. Thank you for not allowing Rusty's death to be evaded.
Thank you.
But I need, and George needs, and my sister needs, we all need something good to come out of this. And some good has. Definitely. But I need more. I need more good to come out of it. So.
We've got to change how business is done in Washington.
November 2008. Barack Obama wins the election for president. He faces an economic recession, 2 wars, and a deeply divided nation. OSHA and workplace safety is low on the country's list of priorities. That responsibility now rests on Obama's new Secretary of Labor.
To those who have, for too long, abused workers, put them in harm's way, denied them fair pay, let me be clear. There is a new sheriff in town.
Now the new head of OSHA says a crackdown is coming, with 100 new inspectors hired and a get-tough policy with companies that ignore their worker safety.
Many of the people who had been very critical of the Bush administration's OSHA came into the Obama administration.
Look, there's no question that President Obama has appointed the best administrators in the Labor Department in decades.
The Department of Labor is back in the enforcement business.
With Edwin Folk out, Solis names Jordan Barrow as acting head of OSHA.
Well, when we came in, we wanted to put a new emphasis on enforcement and issuing standards, and that's what we did pretty much from the beginning.
Federal OSHA health and safety officers are being brought in to help Nevada.
At that point, they began looking pretty closely at Nevada, which was basically unprecedented to have the feds come in like that. And they knew what had happened with CityCenter and what Nevada OSHA's response had been.
A high number of well-publicized construction-related fatalities on the Las Vegas Strip raised a number of serious questions about the operation of Nevada's OSHA program. What we found in Nevada was there was really kind of a systemic problem. I mean, there was a problem with hazard identification, there was a problem with how they were doing their initial citations, there was a problem all the way up and down the line.
It was clear to lead investigator John Olachea that Boyd management and the supervisors knew of the dangerous conditions that existed concerning confined spaces, yet Nevada OSHA management would not support those citations and essentially let the gaming company get away with, in my opinion, murder.
Deb files an official federal complaint urging the feds to investigate the handling of her son's case and reinstate the original fines.
After this happened, one of my first prayers was, God, please just let my voice be heard. Please let this one little mama's voice be heard.
Towards the last month or so when I was there, the Orleans case came up, and there was some very serious concerns. I had the clear impression at the time that there was some level of influence coming from much higher than the administrator or the supervisor on the ground that I thought was a bit unusual.
Jim Gibbons was sworn in as governor of Nevada last week.
There were some penalty reductions, significant penalty reductions that we couldn't really be justified.
I stand before you and pledge to fiercely defend the Constitution with as much steadfastness as I have trust in the people of this great state.
With Boyd being both a campaign contributor but also a very, very large employer in Nevada, also means that this is a company that's going to get certain access. And I think that was the concern, was Boyd getting some kind of special treatment because of this? They were things that had never gone on in an investigation before.
The feds look deeper into the allegations of corruption. First, it's confirmed that a high-level appointee in Governor Jim Gibbons' office is involved in the case and at the informal conference meeting between Boyd Gaming and Nevada OSHA. During the conference, the lead OSHA investigator presents his evidence for the original willful violations. Days later, a second conference is held, this time without the lead investigator, where the willful violations are dropped and the penalties significantly reduced. Boyd is then offered a voluntary partnership program, or VPP, typically reserved for smaller companies with limited resources. The program exempts them from regular OSHA inspections for 2 years. Despite Deb's formal complaint, federal OSHA concludes that Nevada OSHA's handling of the case is highly irregular, but legal.
There were a number of repeat and willful violations that were in the original docket of citations. Those all went away.
Powerful companies such as the gaming industry use their political connections to influence such things as the outcome of an investigation, as I believe Boyd Gaming did.
Money is power in our society. Whether it's an outfit like Boyd Gaming, these guys can do a lot of damage, politically and legally and otherwise.
This is not at all just a Las Vegas problem. This is from one end of the country to the other, from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. It happens all the time.
Rescue workers, we're told, are on the scene at the Upper Big Branch South Mine.
Something went very wrong here for us to have the magnitude of this explosion.
At least half a dozen miners confirmed dead.
Coast Guard rescuers spent the day looking for 11 missing oil workers after a huge explosion rocked a drilling rig.
Like Boyd Gaming, BP and Massey Mining Company have a history of prior safety violations, with hazards known by workers, management, and both government safety agencies that oversee them, OSHA and MSHA, the Federal Mining Safety Agency.
Communities have been upended. We owe them action. We owe them accountability. They ought to know that behind them there is a company that's doing what it takes to protect them, and a government that is looking out for their safety.
But you mentioned your agency did cite them, a huge jump in citations.
Right, and so they've been able to manipulate the system, and we have to close those loopholes. The way I see it right now, you could drive a truck through the loopholes that exist.
When the Obama administration came in, we had extremely high expectations about what they would accomplish. And I think that over the 2-year period, there have been a number of disappointments.
The new sheriff in town talks tougher than she acts.
Well, we're trying out different things. I mean, you have to understand, we're a small agency. OSHA's budget is, barely an asterisk on the federal budget. So there's only so much we can do.
If OSHA wasn't in place, I think we would have a much higher rate of injury. Because of OSHA and the passage back in 1970, we've been able to see reductions of 65% in occupational injury and illness. And that has been a tremendous factor that has helped keep people on the job, keep them safe.
By treating its workers as assets.
Since OSHA was enacted, each administration, Republican and Democrat alike, boasts that their health and safety approach is the most effective means of reducing fatality and injury rates. Yet the real question is, has either party ever had the resources or leeway to truly accomplish OSHA's intended mission? OSHA's annual budget is considerably lower than other agencies and departments, especially given the scope of their responsibilities. In 2010, OSHA had 2,000 compliance officers inspecting 8 million workplaces. At that rate, it would take them over 100 years to inspect them all, even once. If they happen to find a violation during these rare inspections, the penalty fees attached, meant to be punishment and a deterrent to others, may not be set up to accomplish the intended goal. Other regulatory agencies have much higher limits for violations that are much less significant. Even when all OSHA fines for a given year are combined, they are a mere fraction of what employers must pay for worker compensation fees, insurance policies, and other free market incentives to keep workers safe. So with all this taken into account, why would a company worry about OSHA? The truth is, they often don't. A fact that is typically omitted by labor officials and many worker advocates is that fatality and injury rates were coming down long before OSHA was enacted, at a similar, albeit slow and steady rate.
But the show must go on, and tonight, as many in Vegas celebrate the grand opening of a multi-billion-dollar project, the question is whether the CityCenter is the answer or just another risky bet.
Recently as April, they came within half an hour of abandoning the project.
We've had a couple near-death experiences.
But MGM wagered on an economic recovery and kept building.
Despite continued financial hardships in Las Vegas, as well as 6 worker deaths, issues with investors, and tough public scrutiny, CityCenter gets the final piece of financing it needs, allowing MGM, Perrini, and their subcontractors to finish the project.
Across town, a $4.8 billion resort called the Echelon has been halted.
And people lost their jobs this week at the Fontainebleau, which is going up on the Strip.
The Fontainebleau Hotel and Boyd Gaming's massive Echelon project, each of which suffered 1 worker death, have run out of money and are halted indefinitely.
An estimated 146,300 Nevadans are now out of work.
Currently, the unemployment rate in my home state is at 11.7%. Onerous rules and regulations should not be a roadblock to job creation and economic growth. Regulations by OSHA cost small businesses between $650 and $781 per employee.
The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Klein.
We believe that the issues that we have been talking about strike directly to the problem of unemployment and the lack of jobs in this country.
By 2011, Republicans are the majority in the House. Congressman John Klein, now head of the committee that oversees OSHA, along with many of his colleagues in the House, point to regulatory reform as a key way to unburden the economy and create jobs.
The House is set to vote on a bill next week on any major regulation strangling American businesses.
What do you say to an iron worker working on a skyscraper? Hold on tight? We saw what happened when they went to the least costly, effective restraints on workers working on skyscrapers in Las Vegas. They were killing them. Record rate of killing construction workers. But they had the least costly. They didn't think they should have to string a net 3 floors down to catch the workers as they fell. They just chose another method, the least costly.
You're always going to get the people who, pound on the table and say, so long as any workers are dying, that's too many. We should spend an infinite amount to save them. And we just can't do it. I mean, society doesn't have the resources to do that.
It was more than 3 years ago that a construction crane collapsed on East 91st Street, killing 2 workers.
And now the owner of the crane is charged with manslaughter.
On trial is James Loma, whose greed, says the prosecutor, put profit over the safety of others.
New York State charges James Loma, the largest crane owner in the city, with multiple counts of criminal negligence, including manslaughter, in connection with the 2008 crane collapse that killed 2 workers.
Operating the crane was 30-year-old Donald Leo, who died in the crash 2 weeks before his wedding.
I will never get my son back. My loss is forever.
Everybody that employs anybody should be held accountable to provide a safe work environment.
Further, it's charged the owner had been warned of the danger.
He could face up to 15 years behind bars.
At State Supreme Court, Manhattan, John Slattery, CBS 2 News.
Outrage tonight over a not guilty verdict. The construction crane owner was acquitted of manslaughter.
James Loma walked out of the Manhattan Supreme Courtroom without emotion or comment.
More people will continue to die because of this decision.
When the criminal courts and OSHA are unable to hold employers accountable, workers and their families can sue in civil court as their last option to get the justice they feel they deserve.
Shouldn't I, as a worker, be mad as heck that my company could just kill me and get away with it?
Deb Fergan, whose state never brought criminal charges in the first place, finds a Las Vegas attorney with over 25 years of experience to take her civil case.
It's all about intent. If you're going to pursue a case against an employer, the employer has to intentionally do something with the knowledge, that's the tough part, that what they're intending is going to result in injury or harm. Attorneys gave interviews in the paper about Deb's case saying that she had no case. She was going to go nowhere with it.
In order to prevent frivolous lawsuits, the burden of proof in civil cases like this is high. The lawsuit will take years.
Today, Easter Sunday, early wealth of sunshine will slowly give way to increasing clouds through the afternoon. We should move into mostly sunny skies by Friday with our high of around 59 degrees.
We often hear about the mining disasters and the Upper Big Branch disasters, but most fatalities happen one at a time in towns across the U.S. And many of those family members feel alone and don't know anyone that's been in the same situations. It's kind of the collateral damage of what happens when workers are injured or killed in the workplace.
Oh, there was times where I was so angry that I didn't even know how to manage the anger. And I was alone most of the time, so it was just an inward anger.
I couldn't imagine, if I was in Debbie's position and let's say if it would have been my son or daughter that would have been involved in this, I would have wanted blood. But that's just me.
When you deal with a worker death, nobody gets arrested. Nothing usually ever happens to that person. The company gets slapped on the wrist, and then they go on about their business. We have to live with the misery of it. Five years later, and I still deal with it. I think of Travis all the time.
How about we leave it? So is everybody set? Does everybody know what we're going to be doing? We're going to go in? I know.
Deb joins a national support group started by Tammy Miser after her brother was killed in a factory explosion sparked by combustible dust.
The doctors said what to you?
They told us that there wasn't any hope, that his internal organs were burned beyond repair.
There was nobody there until Tammy Miser founded our organization. We do everything that we can to give some kind of support to these people because they're lost.
There's nothing worse that could happen to them, so what if they got to lose?
Debbie, along with other grieving family members and some union leaders, testified in Carson City and here in the Valley in front of the Commerce and Labor Committee today, hoping for change.
I have long said that if Nevada OSHA had held Boyd Gaming accountable to the letter in the Orleans case, it would have sent the message a lot sooner and a lot louder.
I used to be a pretty timid person and I was afraid of a lot of authority, but I'm telling you now, what are they going to do?
In the face of extraordinary amounts of money coming from corporate lobbies in our nation's capital, who is going to stand up for average workers?
Too many business owners think finally, as a group, I think we're becoming a force to be reckoned with. There was another confined space issue, but 2 days later, the supervisors decided to go ahead and send these guys down to confined space. Don't tell me that's not intent.
Debbie has found a way for her to take blood. Her version of blood.
Personally, I feel that there's a lot of corruption that goes on in this state.
This is like a career now, and I need to try to keep other families from having to endure the pain and the grief that I've had to endure.
Quality. It's much more than just the straightness of a line or the smoothness of a curve. Because quality isn't something you measure for afterwards. You build it into the task from the very start. It is a way of working. It is a mission. Now, this kind of excellence doesn't just happen. It is a conscious effort. At Perrini, it is a company-wide partnership.
What goes up must come down, right? That's the saying.
All surrounds the flawed Harmon Tower, which was supposed to be the showpiece of MGM's CityCenter.
In July, a county-commissioned analyst said the Harmon Tower could not withstand a strong earthquake.
Perrini and MGM were criticized that the rush to finish CityCenter had contributed to the deaths of Rusty and the 5 other workers who were killed during construction. Yet if that rush was intended to maximize profits, they are now hit with the news that the steel support rods in CityCenter's Harmon Tower were placed incorrectly, and has left them with a 23-story building that from the outside looks finished, but on the inside is completely empty and unusable.
Is it coming down? Is it staying up?
The tower's builders, Perrini Construction, did its own research saying it is safe. Commissioner Steve Sisolak says the situation is quite urgent.
It was the biggest issue when we was going through it with Rusty, that the Mirage or Perrini or SME could not have the decency to talk to Monique. But the only thing they were worried about was getting it behind them quick as they could to get the job opened up and keep going, you know.
The one thing that I felt over and over again was they made me feel like my brother didn't matter. And when someone like Deb's organization does what they do, the family, you know, you let the family know that person mattered, you know, that person mattered, and that's a lot.
Sometimes I get really tired. It feels like we're just beating our heads up against a wall and we're not getting anywhere, but you just have to keep swinging the bat and hoping to hit it out of the park one of these days. We know personally the devastation and the toll that it takes on a family when a preventable workplace incident takes place. If Nevada OSHA had held the gaming company accountable, it would have sent a ripple effect message across the Las Vegas Valley. Don't mess with us. Thank you. I'm just in it for the long haul. There's nothing else I can do about it. What do I have to lose?
As I've said before, my top priority as president is doing everything we need to do to make sure that we're growing our economy and that we're strengthening our middle class. So I want to begin by thanking Hilda Solis and her entire team. And today I'm proud to nominate a leader to carry on those efforts as America's Next, Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez.
Over my career, I've learned that true progress is possible if you focus on results. I look forward to taking these lessons.
I get very frustrated, the political part of it, because nothing has changed, and it's like you're just talking and talking and talking, and nothing gets done.
Get out of here! Please get out of here!
Everybody needs to get away from there.
Dozens of residents in West Texas remain unaccounted for tonight after a massive explosion at a fertilizer plant.
The devastation today is so great that authorities cannot say how many have died.
The explosion at the West fertilizer plant was so powerful it registered as a 2.1 earthquake on the Richter scale, flattening houses in a 5-mile radius. Ultimately, 15 people are killed, including firefighters and civilians, and over 200 are injured. The parent company, Adair Grain, is accused of unsafe handling and storage of chemicals known to be dangerous.
And to the families and neighbors grappling with unbearable loss, we are here to say you are not alone.
Without the president actively calling for a solution, workplace safety advocates remain pessimistic that anything will get done in Congress to address the problem.
There was 1,300 times the amount of ammonium nitrate in the plant.
1,300 times?
Of what was illegally allowed. No fire alarms, no sprinklers, no shut-off valves, and most importantly, no blast walls that are legally required. OSHA is so underfunded that the last time this plant was inspected was in 1985.
Time goes by. The collective memory fades. It's back to business as usual until we have another disaster, until there's another example.
Federal safety investigators are looking into 2 recent construction deaths at the same apartment complex in Fayetteville.
Construction site in the Summerlin area has fallen to his death.
A worker is dead after a building partially collapsed.
Construction worker killed in an industrial accident killed a welder in
a devastating plant accident that left 4 employees dead, 2 of them sadly brothers.
This is Cutter's No
Subcontractors working for construction giant Tudor Perrini mistakenly drilled right into the subway tunnel.
"2015 is looking good for Las Vegas. Tourism is returning to pre-recession levels. MGM stock price is on the rebound. Boyd Gaming sells the unfinished Echelon to a Malaysian casino and resort firm, and new construction projects are on the rise across the city." But MGM and Perrini, once aligned in their mission to build the most expensive commercial construction project in U.S. history, have been battling each other in court to see who's financially responsible for the Harmon's defects, now determined by the city to be unsalvageable. Deb's case has been tied up in the court system for over 7 years. In between various events and speeches she gives around the country, she helps compile a comprehensive list of every worker who has lost their lives in workplace-related incidents.
Okay, let's see.
To put a name to the statistic.
I see the steady stream, and it's from preventable things constantly to yesterday. Those are the tough ones. Those are the ones that you know that should not have happened. To a base of a ravine at the site to retrieve some equipment. William Carl died on the job during bridge demolition. This past Monday, this February 2nd, was the 8th anniversary of Travis's death.
What about, Dave? You talked to Dave at all?
You know, I haven't talked to Dave in several years. We've just totally lost touch.
It was 8 years ago. My kids were 3 and 1. I was in the hospital in a coma during my daughter's first birthday. It pushed me to probably my darkest. And crap, I was living out of my abandoned house with no power and no water. I've been struggling for years with depression. I've got cognitive brain damage from being in that hole, breathing in those gases. I fell into the work comp system. I had a lawyer after they started looking more and more into it, they didn't feel that it was worth their time. I don't know.
You have 8 recently.
Dave has never been able to move forward with his own civil case. And despite repeated attempts from Boyd Gaming to have Deb's case dismissed, there's finally hope that she might hold Boyd Gaming accountable for Travis's death.
The Boyd Gaming attorney group pulled out all the stops at the end. They wanted nothing to do with the trial on this case.
Towards the end, when we had to go through monthly hearings down at the courthouse downtown, that was very difficult for me.
Along with Dave Snow's firsthand testimony, perhaps the most damning evidence comes from Boyd's own safety manager.
The former safety manager of Boyd Gaming, Don Barker, testified under oath that Boyd Gaming wasn't interested in any type of safety programs unless it cost them no money or it was superficial. And to me, that sealed it.
Against very difficult odds, the Nevada Supreme Court begins a briefing schedule to hear the merits of the case moving forward to a jury trial.
It was at that time settlement discussions then started.
I actually, with the way everything turned out, I honestly do feel it was a win. The company was held accountable, and they had to own up to what, they may not have admitted anything, but as far as I'm concerned, they own up for what they did. Whether it was a jury trial or whether it was this way, to me, I won.
As the economy starts to gain strength, developers around the country are starting to think big again. In Los Angeles, contractor Turner Construction Company is building the Wilshire Grand Hotel, a $1 billion project which will be the tallest building west of Chicago when it's finished in 2017. They are going well beyond government safety standards to eliminate preventable accidents. They've reduced injury rates even as their construction activity continues to increase.
An enlightened employer will know that treating workers well works to the company's advantage, gets the best out of the workers, and managing those workers well means that a job is actually more likely than not going to be cheaper.
I think that's a fundamental question that this story brings up, because it is true that in our society we do want to build things, but the question is, how do we do it in a safer way, or how do we balance these different competing desires that we have?
We shouldn't be afraid of hard questions. Yes, you may look bad for a period of time, but if you can actually do something good from it, then isn't that worth it in the long run?
Over and over again, the willful and repeat behavior of an employee.
I applaud everyone involved of looking for the truth and for trying to ensure that hardworking people can go home to their families at the end of the day.
I don't want what's happened to me to happen to someone else.
This is not a matter of left or right. This is not a matter of ideology.
James Ivanhoe, 19 students.
Just look at the numbers, 4,500 workers killed every year. There's still a lot of employers out there that, hope they can cut corners and not get caught.
You don't have to cut many corners to kill a lot of people.
It was not cost effective to put in the proper safety measures.
I'm not waiting for the Democratic Party. I'm not waiting for the labor unions. I'm not waiting for anybody else to speak truth to power here. You want to make a change, you got to ask yourself, what am I worth?
It took a while after September 11th for construction to get started, but eventually the tower started to alter Manhattan's skyline, 21 feet taller than the Empire State Building.
It is amazing what can be achieved and what has been achieved when companies and their employees are working together to build something. And people don't want to be part of a failure, they want to be part of a success. And if employers can tap into that sense of pride, they can achieve something truly magnificent.
The MGM Resorts and its former contractor reached a confidential deal, stopping what might have been a lengthy trial in which millions of dollars were at stake. CityCenter will work with demolition experts to determine the best method of safely removing the building.
Now it's investigating CityCenter's nearly $400 million claim for a total loss.
The problems of rapid growth are real but not insurmountable. In many dramatic ways, we are moving in on obsolescence. And as we see here the rubble of demolition, let us remember that in many ways the continent is still before us. And so the city remains dynamic. Surely, if we can recapture the courage and forward-looking spirit of the discoverers and pioneers of America, building better cities will be assured. What amazing achievement there has been in America.
There kept being these stories, but another worker died, now another worker died. At some point, it's almost not a story anymore. That's the really sad part.
I still feel I'm just a mom, and I'm just a grandmom, but I just had the fight in me that I wanted to do that for my son. I wasn't going to let him down.
I want to, make sure that I'm a huge part of my daughter's lives. Fortunately, I'm tough. Even though I feel broken, it's all can be underneath, mentally, physically, worn, wiped out.
And that's the problem you got. It's a big issue, and it all goes back to politics. It really does.
Here we go. This morning we will consider the committee's rules and oversight plan for the 114th Congress.